Office. I wish to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect of their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the Chairman to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected to the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise or make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. I also wish to advise you that any submission or opening statements you have made to the committee will be published on the committee website after this meeting. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or unofficially, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. And I would remind members and witnesses to turn off your mobile phones as they interfere with the sound system. I would like to welcome the following witnesses from the Public Banking Forum of Ireland, PBFI, to the meeting today to engage with the Joint Committee in relation to the impact of the uptake of retirement packages at An Post. The main witnesses will speak for no more than 5 minutes, followed by a questions and answer session where members may ask questions not exceeding 3 minutes. We have Mr Seamus May, co-chairperson and spokesperson of PBFI, Mr Tom O'Callaghan, leader for Post Office Unit PBFI, and Mr Jerry Duddy, secretary and lead researcher from PBFI. Mr May, I'll now ask you to make your opening address, and I'll just indicate after 4 minutes to let you know that you have a minute remaining. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I'll try and keep this to 5 minutes. I think I'm a little bit over it, but however. Just good afternoon, and thank you, Deputy Naughton and members and staff of the committee for giving us, the Public Banking Forum of Ireland, the opportunity to make such an important presentation regarding the future of the post office network and its intrinsic link to the future of Ireland's indigenous economy. I'm Seamus May, co-chair of the Public Banking Forum of Ireland and also chair of the International Small Business Alliance. Jerry Duddy on my left is secretary of the PBFI and head of research, and Mr Tom O'Callaghan on my right looks after the post office side of things with PBFI, and he's also chairman of the Independent Postmasters Group. Together with our extensive membership, we bring many dozens of years of experience in business, banking, credit unions, post offices and the indigenous economy. As a business person with over 40 years' experience and a commerce degree, I had a basic understanding of banking, with little to no understanding of credit creation, nor indeed the crucial difference between funding the productive economy and funding speculative bubbles. PBFI is a solution-based forum. Its members work voluntarily and we do not receive any remuneration or expenses. We are wholly independent from vested interests. We might also refer to our extensive letter of the 27th of June to the committee, and also that's Appendix 2, and to an update on the current position which we provided in Appendix 1. We hope over the coming minutes to outline the wider issues our country faces in relation to both banking and driving our indigenous economy, and how crucial a role our valued post office network can play in assisting the transformation of the Irish socio-economy. What do we mean by transforming? Well, back in 2011, we wrote a letter of congratulations to incoming Taoiseach Enda Kenny, in which we pointed out that Ireland's cost base was unsustainably high and that we had an over-reliance on foreign direct investment, underpinned by a corporate tax structure that was incurring the wrath of the US, the EU, the OECD and our near neighbours in the UK. Since then, these influential players in international trade have taken steps that may ultimately wipe out Ireland's corporate tax advantages. Apple will also prove to be a defining moment in the future of foreign direct investment in Ireland. The other side of the coin is where the post offices come in. The reality is that we have only been paying lip service to our indigenous economy. Like it or not, the responsible and sustainable development of our indigenous economy is crucial to our future. We must create a competitive platform that facilitates the long-term future of our socio-economy. This view is somewhat at odds with the views put forward by retired Secretary-General of the Department of Finance, John Moran, who in May 2016, in a speech, he suggests that Ireland can no longer afford rural Ireland. That's Appendix 3. Clearly, there are choices to be made, but we must be careful not to confuse any rural-urban divide with the overriding importance of our indigenous economy. What is patently clear is that the current structure and behaviour of our banking sector is wholly incompatible with driving our indigenous economy. The pillar banks are not lending in any meaningful way to our citizens, our SMEs and farmers, and where they are, the rates charged are exorbitant, 2, 3, 4 and up to 5 times what our counterparts in Germany and France are paying in interest. Last year, AIB gouged 1.6 billion in profit, and Bank of Ireland is gouging profits of circa 1 billion per year, and it appears that neither institution will pay corporation tax for up to 20 years. I follow that with an example, and I'll just shorten it down a little bit considering we have time constraints, but we did an exercise last autumn on the cost of a mortgage on a €315,000 house. And it turns out that over 30 years, over the life of the mortgage, an Irish person will pay 121,000 more for the house than their counterpart in Germany. That's £4,000 to €4,000 per year of a penalty between the difference between Germany's interest rate and Ireland's interest rate. KfW, Germany's development bank, in its 2015 report states that the German economy boasts almost 4 million SMEs and micro-enterprises. These account for 99.95% of all companies and 87% have a turnover of less than 1 million. It's the world's fourth largest economy. Why? Because it is underpinned by a public and community bank network that prioritises people and local economies over profit maximisation. Public and community banks account for some 70% of the German banking sector. German pillar banks, Deutsche Bank, Commerzbank, etc., have only 12.5% of the German market compared to Irish pillar banks, which hold 95% of our market. The Irish government agreed and committed to the introduction of competition to the Irish banking market as a quid pro quo during the banking bailout, but instead we have seen a mass exodus of banks, Nationwide, Anglo, ACC, ICC, Bank of Scotland, EBS. Also, Article 45, subsection 2.4 of our Constitution states that in what pertains to the control of credit, the constant and predominant aim shall be the welfare of the people. Under our Constitution, the Oireachtais is bound to enshrine this directive principle, but as stands, this has not been happening. Further, in November 16, Dáil Éireann unanimously passed a motion that allowed for the remodelling of the post office network along the lines of either the German Sparkasse or New Zealand Kiwi Bank model. Ireland's post office network can become a core plank of rebuilding Ireland, along with our credit unions, just like the Kiwi Post Bank has done in New Zealand. With respect, the current narrative on post offices is all wrong. All we hear from media is about saving our post offices and subsidising them, when we can, at the stroke of a pen, turn the network into a thriving, profitable bank and multi-service provider. The post office network is failing in terms of monetary returns, but the reason for this is quite simple. The business model is wrong. Kiwi Bank makes $100 million in profits each year for the people of New Zealand. It provides credit at competitive rates and has proved the saviour of the people and small industries of New Zealand. The current on-post proposals are bizarre and ill thought out. Currently, we are presiding over the destruction of one of our finest assets, 159 retiring, 231 with no future, and the remaining 690 POs depend on Post Office once again winning the social welfare contract after that expires on the 31st of December 19. Having regard to European procurement law, there is no certainty that An Post will be successful in once again winning the contract. As a country going forward, we need to start thinking outside the box. In the words of renowned Professor Steve Keane of Kingston University, ultimately, the financial sector should be the servant of the rest of the economy, not the master. But at the moment, it's the master of not just the economy, but of the politicians as well. So to break the nexus, we need a complete political shift. We appeal to you today to immediately call a halt to the wanton destruction of our post office network and turn it around to serve the needs of a modern indigenous economy. There is plenty of help and guidance available to your committee and to the Minister. Professor Richard Werner, for one, of Southampton University, is one of the world's leading banking experts, whom we believe could bring enormous perspective to the committee, and we would urge the committee to engage with them. We're sure you'll have lots of questions for us, and we'll endeavour to be as helpful as we can going forward. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. May. And I'm going to start with the members of the committee who have indicated to me, Deputy Dooley and then Deputy Smith.
Thanks very much, Chairperson, and thanks to Mr. May and Mr. O'Callaghan and Mr. Duddy for their presentation here today. It certainly is very thought-provoking, and for sure there is a debate around the way in which our banking model works or doesn't work in this state. I suppose our primary concern is the post office network, and whilst I accept you're offering a potential solution to the maintenance of the network by the creation of this bank, I for one must put on the record my concerns about conflating the two issues. I see the post office as a network that delivers a service. You're advocating, and fair enough, the creation of a banking model that will turn our current banking model on its head. That's a debate perhaps for the Finance Committee or elsewhere. But to do all of that and save the network, I think in the short time that we have available to us, certainly stretches it a bit. The people that I meet and represent in my community and in other communities are anxious to retain a post office service so that they can get basic post office services and they can get their payments. They're not queuing up for another bank, but for sure the kind of attractive offering that you have, I'm sure they would. The question I have, I suppose, is how quickly could such a bank be put in place? What's the cost of it? How much would have to be invested by the state in such a bank? Where would the expertise come from to set a bank in place so quickly? You did say, Mr. May, that it could be done at the stroke of a pen. I've had the privilege of listening to Mr. Dudley on a number of occasions where he has indicated that An Post had a banking licence and that it was only a matter of reinitiating that. Now, I'm no banking expert, but if you're to lend money, you need to have money in the first instance in order to be able to get money from the markets. And you also need to be in a position to give confidence to those who will deposit money with you. Now, all of that takes time, and I know you regularly, and I've read and I've listened to Tom O'Callaghan with interest, referring to the Kiwi model. That's all fine, and the Sparskan model in Germany. That's all good stuff. We're a different country, we have a different culture, and we do things differently. If I talk to a farmer in West Clare who's just sold his herd of cattle, do you have the capacity to assure him that his money is safe in such a bank? Can you get that kind of a model in place quick enough to save the post office network? For sure, ideas are good, definitely needs to be addressed over time, but we have a crisis, and Tom O'Callaghan knows it better than anyone. There's 159 post offices closing in the next 2 to 3 months. How do you propose that you can be in place to resolve that matter?
I'm going to take a number of members. You might just take note of those questions and I'm going to come back to you. Next on my list here would be Sinn Féin. And have you a question right now, Deputy Kenny? If not, I can come back to you later.
No, it's okay.
Deputy Kenny.
And then a short question. First of all, to thank the 3 contributors here today and for the work they've done on this. I've seen it before and I know the potential which this has. Unfortunately, it has been around for years and hasn't been brought forward. And just in regard to the post offices, the crisis in the post office is not something that has been created in the last couple of months. It's over the last 20 years that crisis has been created. Because as things move forward, as the economy grew, as potential for the post office to do other business, to expand and to grow and to meet the requirements of a modern society, it was prevented from doing so. And that's what brings us to where we are now. And one of the things it was prevented from doing was to put a proper banking system in place. And just in regard to the proposal you have here, the question that Deputy Dooley asked in regard to the timescale it would take to set up, how much would it cost to set up? What kind of money would need to be put in there to make this happen? And if it were to be set up, I assume what you're talking about is that the post office network would act, if you like, as the front door. It would be the place where the people in the community would go to do their transactions. If that were the case, is there additional technology that would need to be there into the post office network? Would they need to get broadband service and everything that which is sparse enough, as we know, in many parts of rural Ireland? Would that need to be upgraded as well? And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Deputy, for keeping it short. Deputy Smith.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I think the truth is that we spent a good deal of the last term looking at and talking about the Sparkhazen and Kiwi Bank model. It came up many times at this committee and on the floor of the Dáil and at questions to the Minister. We had some very energised debates about whether this could work or not, and the government committed to looking at it and examining it. And they did that, and they came back with a report released in July by Paschal Donoghue, stating that there is not a compelling case for the state to establish a new local public banking system. The cost to the Exchequer for the proposed new model is estimated at a minimum of 170 million. The assumptions in the proposal based on cost, interest rates and loan attrition rates appear challenging. When I saw this, I nearly fell down laughing that we couldn't support a public banking sector to the tune of an enormous €170 million when we've just thrown 64 billion at AIB and the rest of them? Now, I'm sure your reaction was the same, so I think it's disingenuous for other deputies to say that this is too late, that we're a different country, we do things differently, we've a different culture. Yes, we do. We've a very different culture. We've had the biggest bank bailout in the history, and we've refused the Apple tax that's due to us of at least 13 billion. So I want to fully support your contention that it's not too late, that we should look at this, but I think I'd like to know what you think. I would be hugely critical of the fact that the Minister released this report in July when we had gone on a Dáil break in order to tell everybody in the country that's it, the final death nail goes into the coffin of the post office, because this is just the beginning of the closure of our post offices, what we have just seen. And this proposal was a way to help us step away from that, but also to be fair to the Irish people, to the small businesses, to the farmers, and give them a way to borrow at a decent rate, a realistic, humane rate, the way they can in Germany, in New Zealand and elsewhere. So I'd like you to give me your response to this report that you saw in July, please.
To just bring in Deputy Ryan, who's the last of the members of the committee who have indicated, before I go back to the witnesses.
Thank you very much indeed. We very much support the Sparkhausen banking model. I've been working with them for about 4 years now, and as presented, I think, by the Irish Rural Link and others to the Department of Finance, to get the response they did for the Department of Finance, was very disappointed. My understanding is Minister Ring is saying it all is not lost, and that the government gave the government a bit of time to consider it. Now, they've had 4 years, and I think we should be proceeding. I think there is a confluence between this issue and the closure of our post offices, because I think it does provide a model to give another service, and it is a service to small business particularly. It has the advantage that deposits raised in certain areas are retained in those same areas, so it really is about regional development, and it brings some of the expertise that the Sparkhausen organisation has in such professional small business lending into the post office, or indeed into credit unions. There are a variety of ways it could be introduced. So we very much support it and are deeply frustrated at the lack of vision within the government and government parties in that regard. Just one question to the people presenting here today. Are they supportive of that Sparkhausen model as has been presented by Rural Link? I'm not familiar with the Kiwi model, but I am with Sparkhausen one. It's one that I think would work, and I just want to know clear that they're supportive of the approach that's been taken in that regard.
I know there's a lot of questions there, and I'm going to go back to the others who've indicated, but I'm just going to let the witnesses answer this tranche, and I'll come back to those who've indicated. So those who've indicated: Deputy Danny Healy-Rae, Deputy Michael Harty, and Senator Mary-Louise O'Donnell. You can answer them in any order you wish.
Well, just to reverse order, if you like, Deputy Ryan. The Public Banking Forum formed in 2013, and we immediately brought the Sparkus of people from Germany over, and we have done a very extensive report on creating Ireland's alternative banking force, which includes proposals for the Sparkus to work with the credit unions, and also a standalone proposal for the post offices to go the Kiwi bank route. There's nothing to stop the post offices going down the route with the Sparkus model as well. There are a number of options available. But what strikes me is what sort of the establishment and the Department of Finance, and we brought our report to the Department of Finance and Rural Affairs to the Joint Consultation Group, and it was very, very clear. There's a mindset there that we must not compete with the pillar banks. The pillar banks that are charging us 2, 3, 4 and 5 and more times what our counterparts in other countries are paying. That's the mindset. The Constitution is very, very clear. As I've said earlier, it says that in what pertains to the control of credit, the constant and predominant aim shall be the welfare of the people. And what I would say to you, Deputy Dooley, there is a massive, massive untapped indigenous economy out there in the agri-sector, in the aquamarine sector, practically in every sector, and it's bursting, it's dying on its feet for the want of funding. And what we are proposing to do, it's a no-brainer. New Zealand is a very similar country to ours. It's just a few smaller population, in fact, But they called enough is enough. In 2002, they set up the Kiwi Bank. I don't know the figures what it cost to set up, but it was relatively cheap. And within 15 years, it had 20% of the market. So, like, everyone keeps asking how much is it going to cost to set up this new Kiwi Bank. The answer is not a lot in terms of somewhere it may be 50, 60, 70 million. We need to do some more work on it. But we have to look at this in the context of actually, Deputy Smith, 69 billion. We paid 69 billion to bail out our banks that were operating on a criminal basis and are still doing so. And unless and until we lose this mindset about the pillar banks come first, the people don't come at all, unless and until we do that, this economy and this socio-economy is not going anywhere. And we have a glaring opportunity now. We have a crisis in the post offices. We have a glaring opportunity to turn this into a thriving banking and indigenous economy. We must do it. Tom, I bring my colleague Tom.
Well, I suppose firstly, why are we here? And that's a question we all need to ask ourselves. And I genuinely believe this very truthfully, is that we don't want to see the ruination of small village and towns throughout the countryside. And I also do believe that we do care about people. Deputy Dooley, you did make reference that you haven't heard. I have heard a lot of people asking me, well, what can we do to maintain the network? And I do take your point. And I do also take the point is that small offices are closing. But I'm sick to death of getting a sticky plaster just to maintain a network. We have to really look at this from the top down. And it's very simple. It's like a car. You put so much petrol in it to get to your destination and back. Currently, the post office needs 78 million net effectively to maintain itself. And we have an option here to say, well, how do we address that? Grant Thornton clearly stated, and this is, and I will take, I'll bring it back to Deputy Kenny. You're absolutely correct that government actually has attacked its own national assets because, in Grant Thornton 2014, it clearly stated that if we do not maintain government contracts to the value of 60 million, you're effectively shutting down. There's going to be drastic consequences. And it was effectively ignored. So on the basis of the fact that we now know that there are major problems, how do we resolve and how do we go forward? Now, my colleague Jerry will bring in the idea of what it costs. An Post have done this before. Let's be under absolutely no illusion. They created the bank in 2010, 2012 at quite a modest sum with a partner. But what we're saying is very simple. If we want the network to survive on a social and economic, and we have to think of the people as well, because I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen here today, there are very upset people in every village and town because they're absolutely terrified about the fact that it's closing. So what we have to do is to find a solution. Part of that is New Zealand, and the reason that New Zealand has been highlighted, and again I just come to Deputy Ryan that one, against the Sparkinson, is because the post office is interlinked. It's an already set up branch network, and at turn of a light switch you do one situation or business that proposal, it can be rolled out in every network in every village all over Ireland. So you can go down to your Ventry or to go to the GPO in Dublin. And that is, I suppose, reason why we favoured the Kiwi model, and I obviously in the post office network. In connection with Deputy Smith, you make reference to the 170 million. I thought that was an absolute insult to the public to hear that they were more concerned that it was going to cost 170 million and the billions that has been paid out to the pillar banks. What I see here personally is that we're definitely using this as an opportunity to stop a challenge to the pillar bank, and one that will actually be a benefit, because the difference, and let's be clear what we're proposing, is that profits go back to the small communities rather than to the shareholders. And I think that could be a fundamental reason why we're having difficulty.
There's just other outstanding questions there in relation to the expertise that would be required and the technology needed. I don't know if you want to answer them, Mr. Duddy, but yeah, and you can answer any other questions that you see fit.
The Savings Bank Foundation for International Cooperation, who have been before the Finance Committee, have the expertise. It's available in Europe. They have done this kind of work all over Europe. It's not a big deal, and they actually do it at cost. They're a not-for-profit foundation, so they do it at cost. Also, Professor Werner is involved in setting up a bank in Southampton, so he has expertise in that area as well. Regarding the cost of setting up a post bank in 2007, the total cost, on a quick search last night, because I felt it may have been made a big issue of today, was 76 million. Fortis paid 56 million, and the rest was paid by An Post in different forms. They paid 10 million in business assets, and the rest in actual money, cash or credit. They also paid 13.8 million in a finder's fee, but this is probably a buy-in to the system. So that's the cost. But on another issue about the destruction of rural communities and rural post offices, the French government is using the Le Poste and its banking sector to merge with a large insurance company to set up a new banking entity in France. This will be the equivalent of a third pillar of banking in France. So this is happening at the moment. This is going to the government, or being presented by the government currently.
I'm going to bring in the next three people who've indicated: Deputy Danny Healy-Rae, then Deputy Michael Harty, then Senator Mary-Louise O'Donnell. Deputy Healy-Rae.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, it's clear why we're all here today is because that, again, 159 post offices right around the country, 12 in Kerry. And I'm glad to see Tom O'Callaghan here at this meeting today, because I see him at least three community meetings for up to 170 people attended in Kerry, concerned about their post offices being closed. And the community banking, we all believe and believe passionately would help to save our post offices, and I appreciate these other two men coming into us today. And I suppose we're very disappointed with our Minister for Finance more or less laughing at the cost of 160 million to set up this community banking. The question I have is, would this, in fact, if this 160 million was spent to set it up, would this community banking pay back and pay for itself to run itself from there on? I suppose that's the critical question, because money is being pumped into many parts of our economy, and we'll just talk about the health service. Is it adequate, despite all the money that's being pumped into it? It's not manifesting in a service, a proper health service for our people, the people that we're representing, the people that are in trolleys. Again, last week in Tralee, an average of 23 each day on our trolleys in the middle of the summer. But if this would help, like we stated, the indigenous sector, the farming community, local to all the post offices, the small business, the self-employed, and if they were able to get loans locally like that and pay them back, of course, with smaller interest. We know what the banks charge, and we know the torment they're putting people through at the present time, even just to get a €20,000 loan for something very small. They're not helping the people at all. So the main question is, and I'd like to hear you answer it publicly here, would this 160 million, would it pay for itself if it was spent, and could ensure the survival of many of the post offices? Not all of them, but maybe the very most of them.
Deputy, I'm just conscious of you getting your answer to your question as well, just we're under time constraints. Thank you, Deputy Harty.
Thank you, Chair, and thank the witnesses for coming in today. Just to say that there is a vacuum in rural Ireland in relation to banking. The pillar banks have left rural Ireland, and those who are still there have diminished or excluded customer service in their bank, so it's very difficult to speak to somebody when you go into a bank now. So one of the positive things in relation to community banking is that you actually deal with somebody who knows their community and knows the viability of the businesses that may be coming in to seek a loan. An Post has a trusted brand, it has a national network, it has the IT systems already in place, and it should, through a public banking system, have capacity to loan to businesses who can't get a loan from the public banking system or from the pillar banks as they exist at the moment. So my question is it now, in relation to the closure of post offices, is it too late for community banking or a public banking system to step in and preserve the network as it exists at the moment? Because what we really are here about today, certainly what I'm here about today, is to try and preserve the network as it exists, and there needs to be a devolution of services to post offices from government. All government services should be available through the post office network. Community banking is another facet that could support post offices, but how quickly can it be put in place, and is it feasible for it to be put in place to maintain the network as it is at the moment? Thank you, Chair.
Deputy Harty. Senator Mary-Louise O'Donnell.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen. I actually think it's a brilliant creative financial solution, and I actually think it's a very good creative combination as well from a great existing state asset at the post offices. I think people forget that there's something like 22 to 23 billion on deposit in the post offices and another 23 to 24 billion in savings. So Irish people know a safe place. I know it's a savings bank, but they know a safe place to put money. And I have never been asked if I would like to maybe invest my little £5,000 or whatever in something like this, where it would remain alive and I wouldn't lose it, but it would go within community, like a co-op, like the co-ops of years ago in every town in Ireland that kept the town alive. That's the first thing. Investing 120 million, I completely agree with Deputy Smith, is like loose change to vulture funds. It is a disgrace that we're even talking in the millions, whether it's 60 million or 70 million or 120 million. It'd certainly be very worth it. I think that I agree with Tom O'Callaghan that we as a government are absolutely shattering our own asset. And like shattering a clock. If you shatter a clock in the middle, everything on its outers will suffer. I am not suggesting that we should keep post offices with 2 and 3 and 4 people in them alive, and not at all. But you will not keep smaller post offices alive if the centre is being shattered. And we are also then, what are we doing then? Gifting them to conglomerates, putting them into the back of Centras, putting them into the back of Super Values, and soon they will be in the back of Tesco's. And we will go to Tesco for everything. It will end up being the supermarket culture. The last thing I want to say is I cannot understand that the government are so terrified of the pillar banks, considering the way they treated this country. And they have run out of even Ranelagh. There was a man in the other day in Ranelagh, went through the doors fuming because he had 3 or 4 children and had parked, spent him half an hour trying to park. They don't do cash here. We're running around now trying to find out, like evictees, where are we going to get the cash and where are we going to actually bank? And I think everybody sitting around this table, it won't be me, but we're standing for election, better think very clearly and very validly about the new poor. And the new poor in Ireland are the guy and the girl who've got a training and they're earning 30,000 or maybe 60,000 in one house, they're both working, and they're paying 52%, and they have nowhere else to go to get a deposit for the hope of a bedsit in the next 10 years, or they can't even live, they're living hand to mouth because there is no possibility of them saving 10,000 or 20,000. So they have no choice. Now, we're always talking about choice in relation to the human body, but they are closed down in this country, the new poor. And they are the new poor. They are the plumbers and the radiographers and the doctors and the young doctors and the nurses and the teachers, and they're living hand to mouth. Now, people better start thinking about that, because there's a lot of very nice wallpaper, across that tenement, and it is appalling, and they have no alternative. And if only to give people a community social alternative. Imagine living in a country where 96% of their banking is commercial. Only 12% in Germany, and then getting a report, as Deputy Smith said, where the whole thing is dismissed in 3 sentences. It is the biggest election issue.
Thank you, Senator. And finally, Deputy Eugene Murphy, did you want to come in?
Yes,
brief
I'm
question.
going to keep it brief,
just so we can get the answers. Thank you.
Yeah, because I engaged with Tom and Seamus at a public meeting in Attained, so I'm not going to take up a lot of time except for a few short questions. Before I ask those questions, we've had a postal service here. Our first Minister for Post and Telegraphs was 1924, and in this day and age, if we cannot keep a service throughout the country, to support all of our people that need it. It's a poor reflection on Ireland as a society. Two things I just want to put to Seamus and Tom and Jerry here. I don't care who answers it. There are 7,500 people employed in the postal service, as you know. We had to come to the rescue a short time ago when we lifted the cap on the price of a stamp to ensure that significant people wouldn't lose their jobs and that a 5-day or 6-day postal service could continue. And I have no doubt about your passion. I know where you're coming from. You said a lot of good things. The credit union, can you see yourselves coming behind the credit union, who have a network right throughout this country in relation to, non-commercial banking? I think that's one area that there's a lot of work that's been done by the credit union on this. Is it something that you would support rather than maybe look at a new setup of banking? And secondly, in relation to, you spoke about, other areas of business that An Post could go after. But there's one thing amazes me of this. Nobody has mentioned the young generation, the young people. Now, what about a pilot scheme where you would put post offices in on the campuses of universities, DITs, go after the business? There's a huge business there, and would be that part of a policy? Could you bring that into your policies there, that we could, go after that business? Because I think that would be quite lucrative for the postal service, which then would, of course, mean that you could support the postal service in parts of the country where it's not profitable, but we have vulnerable people who are going to be left behind if what is proposed now goes ahead. And to be honest, I know that we're not going to be able to keep all of those 159 post offices opened, but we do need, in terms of vulnerable people, to keep some of them open and have the service there. Thank you.
And I know there's a lot of questions there. There's some overlap, and I could ask you as briefly as possible, and you can come back in written form if you feel that you wanted to give a more extensive answer, and we can take that afterwards. Mr. May.
Yeah, just in general terms, because a lot of the questions and comments were fairly parallel. Deputy Healy-Rae and the 170 million. Well, first and foremost, the 170 million is a figure that the department took from one particular submission, which was from the Sparkers of people. Our submission, this one here, didn't actually look for state money. It did give the option of using state money. But to put things in perspective, the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland, which we've dealt with fairly extensively in our last letter to the committee, that has a budget of $1.25 billion. And it hasn't gone anywhere near achieving its aims and objectives, nor can it, because it is simply a non-lender. The Sparkasse Bank in Germany is over 200 years old, has withstood 2 world wars and several financial crises, and has never had a bailout, has never had a penny of taxpayers' money. And the reason is very simple. It doesn't do speculative lending. It lends to the productive economy. And we mustn't confuse this. What happened in Ireland was our pillar banks, they abandoned the fractional reserve system, and they went into an orgy of credit creation, which only had one place where it could finish, with a big bang. So we're not talking about setting up a bank that can go bust. Banks that are run properly and diligently don't go bust. And would our Kiwi Post Office Bank repay 170 million or 70 million? Yes, of course it would, in a very short space of time. And it's very important, Deputy Murphy, that we don't leave the credit unions out. The Public Banking Forum of Ireland, we have worked very hard across with the credit unions and with the post office movement right from the very outset. And we believe, you must understand that the pillar banks in Ireland have 95% of the market. In Germany, it's 12.5%. So there's room for our Kiwi Bank to take up 20% of the market, just as it has done in New Zealand. But there's still room for our credit unions and credit union stroke community bank to take another 25–30% of the market, which would still leave our pillar banks with far too high of a market share of over 50%. Now, the thing, and I need to explain this, the thing about the credit unions is the restrictions that the government, successive governments and central bank are putting on credit unions are anti-competitive. They cannot and do not comply with Irish competition or European competition law. Why not take the shackles off the credit unions as well while we're at it? Because we have an indigenous economy to worry about. That's what we're looking for. So it's not the nitty-gritty and much of the cost, because we're all agreed that it's peanuts, whatever it might cost. So for the sake of driving this economy, bringing our young people back, opening up all these new industries, which we have researched what we can do, well then we need actually both. We need to drive the Kiwi Bank, to remodel the post offices on the Kiwi Bank, and we need to bring the credit unions on board as well. Tom, would you like to come in?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, and I think it's very important as well, and Deputy Harty, to clarify here, you mentioned, which is a big concern to everyone in this room, is that we're looking at not 159 post offices. We're looking at 390 communities that have not been offered a contract, which is upsetting in itself for those people involved, but more to the point, their income is going to collapse within the 2.5 to 3 years. And the reason for that is we're heavily dependent on a social welfare contract. And that contract at the moment, and let's be clear, in 2012, the government was told that if it reduced from 60 million, there would be problems. They actually reduced it to 54 million, and currently now that's 51. But yet government policy, which is coming in 2019 by Minister Regina Doherty, is clearly stated is going to be tendered. So for the cashless society, so the question is, what's going to replace that income when it does come? Let's be very clear on this. So the answer, which is most important, how do we stop it? Every deputy in Dáil Éireann signed up to this. We all made an agreement, and I negotiated with my colleagues here. And what we asked for very simply was to put a 5-year holding plan, nothing else, but a 5-year holding plan. And what that would do is it would enable us to get us those government contracts that would funnel in within the post office. An example of that would be you're signing on Department of Social Protection. Why can't that be done in your local office? Then we look at motor tax. 80%, yes, is online, but there's 20% that could be done in your local post office. And these are elements that need to be brought up to a head in that we can find a solution from an economic. Now, we've talked about the idea of passion. Yes, we are passionate about the network, and that's why we're all here. That's all of us here. But we have to also be realistic. And again, I would look at the situation where we look at new products. That is a vital part, and that's what the banking will also be enable us to do. You could become an Argos cash log in every post office over in Ireland. Why can't you walk into your small post office and buy a colour television? Why can't you pay back your local office? And why can't that be money then circulated within your village? I think we'd have no trouble getting new customers. But the biggest issue here is this. In England, and again, we need to look at this in a long-term scenario and not a short-term, and look at where mistakes were made and look for solutions going forward. In England, over 10 years ago, Bank of Ireland supposedly came to the rescue of the post office in England. And they did a deal. Everyone thought this is wonderful, and we're going to have loads of products, and then the spin was out that we have every service, and for the rural and urban. The reality of this is now, is that last year alone, over 15 billion profit was made for Bank of Ireland, and the postmasters are struggling to survive. Something is very wrong. What do the unions want to do in England? They want to get out of the deal. To get out of that deal right now is going to cost them over 2 billion. We have an opportunity here to do right for the first time ever. I would make reference to Senator Donald. You're absolutely correct. There are 22 billion approximately within savings investments in your local post office. And we ask, where did that money come from, or how did it build to that figure? We all recall the financial crisis. In 2008, there was a serious issue about whether we would have our own currency. And there was also, we all recall, the stories of the ATM, and there was going to be the army to secure. So what do people do? They turned to their local postmaster. And in a matter of a short space of time, over 15 billion was brought into your post office. That figure is now over 22, I believe. So why are we now attacking the very people all over the country that have helped to mind our money and face now closure? We also make reference then, about the subsidy scenario. And again, I do acknowledge that there is a short-term gap, but this is from a document, Grant Thornton, and it clearly states subvention. This is in connection with Britain. The UK government has used subvention to help the network, and we've heard the figure of 8 million. Again, I have problems with numbers, because I believe the opportunity here is McKinsey have done a detailed analysis of the company. I can assure that we'll give the figures that we need to maintain the network now for the next 5 years, and what proposals we're going to come with to bring us back. But we do not want to cost exchequer money. What we're saying is, if we can bail out a bank, think about this now. We bailed out the banks in 24 hours. and we're prepared to see the network shut down, and we're talking about maybe 170 million. Again, I think our focus is seriously wrong. But what was stated here, the UK government have used subvention to help the network. Their account for the loss of income associated with the reduction in social welfare. That sounds familiar to Ireland. These subsidies at best provide a safety buffer for the Post Office, while it's trying to establish a more reliable long-term stream. So all I'm asking, and I think it's important that we say this, we all agreed in November 2016, and we asked for a holding plan to allow the implementation of this bank, but also the products. And let's put real Ireland back on the map.
Mr. Doherty, do you want to come in?
Well, just to Deputy Harting questioned the how quickly could the bank be profitable. In its third year, the Kiwi Bank made 7 million and continued to rise its profits up to presently over $100 million per annum consistently. And there is talks in New Zealand now of allowing them to keep a good percentage of that profits to further develop the bank in New Zealand.
Okay. Are there any final comments from any of the... Yes,
There's just one very quick point, if you don't mind, because understanding credit and credit creation is very important. If we allow our post office to create credit just like the banks do, then they can provide mortgages at 2%. And for every billion that the post office would create and lend out, it would generate over 20 million in income for itself. So supposing our new Kiwi Post Office Bank has 5 billion out in first-time mortgages, they create an income of 100 million per year. I mean, effectively, this is self-financing with some money required to kickstart at the very beginning, but it's self-financing. So people need to understand the concept of credit creation, which is what the pillar banks do, as against the credit unions or the post offices don't.
Very briefly, Mr. Callan, we have to wrap up.
There's also for the other 690, which is not touched on, there is a contract that's been produced for over 60 pages. Postmasters throughout the country now have serious issues with this, and they're now looking for the legal and financial advice on that basis. And the biggest issue is it's a fixed 7-year contract, so that they have no choice then, or what choice they have going forward after their 7th year, and no security of income, because we're heavily reliant on the social welfare contract, and there's no guaranteed future at the moment.
Thank you very much, and on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you for coming before us this afternoon. And it's proposed that the committee will publish the opening statements to our website. Is that agreed? So we'll now suspend to allow the witnesses to exit their seats and the next witnesses to take their seats, and we'll continue the meeting in public session. Thank you. Thanks very much for coming in.